I'm the assistant town manager here in Tewksbury, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening for zoning bylaw update presentation. I'm gonna tonight kind of run through just some things at a very high level, and then we'll have a lot of time for any questions and answers you may have after the presentation. I think that dialogue is probably the best thing, but there's only 12 slides here, so it'll just kind of help set the context a little bit. And then we'll be available for questions. So these are the contents of the slides. It'll be a little bit about the committee and the consultants, the activity of the committee, the scope of the committee's charge, new features in this zoning bylaw, changes in how the bylaw is organized, additions, deletions from the bylaw, significant modifications, and then we'll talk about some of the zoning map changes also. So the zoning bylaw committee was appointed by the Board of Selectmen. It was created by the Board of Selectmen to have a member of the Board of Selectmen, a member of Planning Board, the building commissioner, who is the zoning enforcement officer. So here you see Robert Fowler, he's the planning board representative. Ed Johnson is the building commissioner. Dick Cuco, or Richard Cuco here, is serving as a citizen representative. And one of the benefits of him sitting on this committee is that he does this in the private sector for a number of different clients in different communities. So he brings in this experience from other communities. Erin Wortman is a resident of Tewksbury, and she is the planning director in the town of Stoneham. That AICP, after her name, is for the American Institute of Certified Planners. This is from the National American Planning Association. Erin was able to receive this certification through that organization. And then Mark Kratman is the Board of Selectmen representative. The consultants that we have working for us on this project were Judy Barrett, who was with RKG Associates when the project started, and then Barrett Planning Group, LLC. One of the benefits of using Judy, besides 30-plus years of experience working in a number of communities in Massachusetts, is that Judy was, I want to make sure I'm close to the mic here. Judy worked on the town of Tewksbury's 2003 master plan, and then also assisted the town in the 2016 update of the master plan. And there's themes from the master plan that kind of carry over into this new draft zoning bylaw. Robert Mitchell, again, is another seasoned planner who was planning director in Burlington, Vermont, Amherst, Massachusetts. He was an adjunct planning professor at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Robert Ritchie is an attorney that was part of the consulting team, and his experience really was, he's former town council for the town of Amherst, and then was an assistant attorney general. So whenever zoning articles are submitted to the state after they've been approved by communities, it was his office that was reviewing them for compliance with both state and federal regulations. So Bob had a lot of breadth as far as seeing zoning amendments across every community in Massachusetts. And he was also closely following Supreme Court decisions relative to signs and First Amendment issues. And then David Gamble kind of rounded out the team. He's a architect that helped with design guidelines for the town center. Staff, as I said, myself, Steve Sadwick, I've been with the town for close to 18 years now. served as planning community development director up until 2016 and have been assistant town manager the last 3 years. Anna McGinty, who is to my left, is the town planner. And Anna's been with us just over a year now and was very helpful in putting this together and also working on the zoning map itself. And then Don Cathcart, who's a permit technician in the building department, again, where there's a lot of zoning enforcement issues that are worked through. She also is the recording secretary for the planning board and has been with the town, I think 16 years now. So Dawn has a lot of experience as to how things really operate on the ground. So the committee has been in existence since 2016. They've met 34 times in addition to 4 joint meetings that have been held with the planning board over the course of the last few months. There were 2 public input sessions early on during the project. There was a public presentation with the planning board regarding design standards. As I said, that was when David Gamble had brought forth his recommendations on design. There was a presentation to the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board that occurred back in June of 2019. We had 2 public presentations in December last month, and then 3 presentations this month, and tonight would be the last of those presentations. So the scope of the committee, there's a lot of text on this slide, so I went in and highlighted what I thought were the important points, but the committee had to select a planning and legal counsel. They were to look at compliance with the most recent edition of Mass General Law, Chapter 48, which is the State Zoning Act. They were to work with other committees and boards in town to make sure that the draft was consistent with the town's master plan. They were to attempt to have prompt and predictable permitting while protecting abutters' rights, determining whether the community's objectives are being met through this draft zoning bylaw, and then have it prepared for town meeting. And the warrant for town meeting closes next Friday, and the article will be submitted for the annual town meeting that comes up in May. So the new features of the zoning bylaw, there was a zoning diagnostic that was done as soon as the consultants were hired, and they were looking for issues of consistency both internally and then with also state and federal statutes. There was a recodification of the bylaw for ease of use and future updates. We went through this back in 2002, and we changed the numbering system in the bylaw, and what we've realized over the course of the last 18 years is that it's become very cumbersome to try and amend. And then we had certain sections of the bylaw were in different locations. If you were talking about parking or landscaping or buffering, you may find it in one section and then find it in another 2 sections. So it became very hard for people to understand, again, both on the applicant side, on the abutter side, and even staff sometimes we were finding things in one location of the bylaw and not realizing that it was in another location of the bylaw also. The proposal is to amend the zoning map to reflect the 2003 and 2016 master plan, which I'll talk a little bit about a little later. We were looking to reduce the number of overlay districts in town. And again, the overlay districts kind of add to confusion. And just to kind of explain what an overlay district is that you have your base zoning districts, and then you can create an overlay on top of that. Some overlay districts are subtractive in nature or restrictive in nature, so you can have things that are going to make development in those areas more challenging. And those are things like an aquifer protection district, which we have one. Floodplain district is another one that we have. And those are examples of restrictive overlays. We had a number of additive overlays, which added additional uses to what was in the underlying district. And so an applicant would decide, I'm going to come in using the overlay district, and abutters would say, well, why is the underlying district not being applied? So it became kind of confusing. So we tried to look at that issue, and again, it kind of goes back to the 2003 and 2016 master plan, where they actually called out for certain character districts along Route 38. And the thought back in 2009 was, well, let's start this by doing overlays instead of changing the zoning completely. We'll leave what's in place and just add something on top of it. This bylaw removes those overlays and says the zoning is what it is in that district. And then that last bullet point there is that we strengthen the design guidelines for town center. So new features of the zoning bylaw, all multifamily developments are capped at 7 units per acre, except in the town center. Again, some of those overlay districts that we had no caps on density, so we're finding that we had some developments coming in that were upwards of 10 units per acre, which was a little bit outside of the character for the town, and the committee decided to cap everything at 7, except for town center. Another item is that in our multifamily developments, there is an affordable housing requirement, and this is to try and assist the town get to the 10% that's required under state statute to prevent comprehensive permits. And there's a mechanism in the zoning bylaw today, which is called a fee in lieu of affordable units, which allows a developer to purchase their affordable, pay the town for their affordable obligation. And that was left, we have a very good formula, and it would continue under this bylaw, but it's being removed as an option going forward for multifamily developments. So in other words, if there's an apartment building that's being built in town, if there's a condominium complex that's being built in town, the affordable units would have to be built in that project. You couldn't say, instead of putting 3 affordable units in there, I'll pay the town the difference. So that I think is a very important thing, because again, this affordable number that we continue to try and chase of 10% prevents comprehensive permits from landing in town where the town has really little control over the developments. And when a developer options for a 40B comprehensive permit, local zoning does not need to be complied with if you're less than 10%. Again, I'd mentioned about strengthening design guidelines for town center, reducing the confusion to owners, abutters, and others by removing those overlay districts, recodifying the bylaw for ease of use and future updates. We added criteria for issuing special permits. Again, by having more specific criteria that the planning board needs to look at when they're approving projects or denying projects, makes it easier for them, the board itself, makes it easier for the applicant to understand how their project is going to be weighed, and then it makes it easier for abutters to understand how that project is going to be weighed, whether it's approved or denied. We rewrote the sign section of the bylaw to bring it in compliance with court cases. There was a Supreme Court case, I think it was 2015, which made it extremely challenging for municipalities across the country when it came to looking at how to regulate signs. So again, with Bob Ritchie's assistance, that Supreme Court decision was used to review our bylaw and then make adjustments to it. And then I had mentioned earlier about parking buffer and landscape requirements. All of that was consolidated into site development standards in one section of the bylaw. So this is how the bylaw is organized. I'm not going to read it to everybody, but you can see it seems to make more logical sense that you would start a document with the definitions right up front so that people can read the definitions and have an understanding before they start diving further into the document. Administration was put up front in this bylaw, again, so you would understand how the building commissioner operates as zoning enforcement officer, how the zoning board of appeals operates and what their jurisdiction is, how site plans are treated, and how special permits are treated. Section 5 with the district regulations has a lot of stuff in there. You know, design, dimensional, and density requirements, that's a lot. Use regulations are in there, so that tells you what uses are allowed in those districts. And then, as I said, we reduced the number of overlay districts, but we still had some that were remaining, and that's where those districts reside. The site development standards, which I talked about earlier, and then the last two sections are for special things, such as family suites, home occupation, and then the other development regulations, multifamily dwellings, affordable housing requirement, wireless communications, and adult use marijuana establishments. So we have new additions that were added to the bylaw. Site plan review is something, it's a new feature in this zoning bylaw. We added in requests for reasonable accommodations. This is mostly in compliance with the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. Our current bylaw does not have purposes written in for every district. That's corrected in this zoning bylaw. The town center development standards are in the bylaw, whereas under the current bylaw, it was an outside document. And then adult use marijuana establishments. What I want to just say about adult use marijuana establishments, for those that were at the last town meeting, we have a ban on the retail sale of recreational marijuana. There were 3 other types of uses that were supposed to be banned, and town meeting voted to allow the sunset of that ban to occur. So right now, effective December 31st of last year, cultivation, research, and manufacturing of recreational marijuana products is something that's allowed in town. In talking with the state about how to handle this, the state said that until such time that the town designates where it's allowed, they wouldn't be accepting applications. So the actions of last town meeting has kind of left this door open that we needed to address. So it's now being addressed in this bylaw. Items that were removed from the bylaw. Currently, we allow for single-family structures in commercial and industrial districts, and the committee and the planning board both looked at that and said, if we're zoning something for commercial and industrial, that's what we prefer to see. We don't want to see single-family homes. We have a lot of area of this town is zoned for residential, single-family residential, and that's where it should be occurring. Transition district regulations were removed because we have regulations elsewhere in the bylaw that kind of duplicated transition district regulations. It was just it's an example of an amendment that occurred for a specific purpose in a specific time, but is now being addressed generally across all districts. The wireless overlay district was removed, which actually shows where sites of wireless cellular antennas and towers can be placed. When you look at different court cases and the Federal Telecommunication Act of 1996, we have very little authority as to where these things can be located. We have other things that we can regulate with cell towers, but location was not really one of them. Where we are today with wireless is that 5G is on its way here. So the industry is starting to change, and the carriers are gearing up for small cell antennas, and those types of antennas are the ones that you see on top of electric poles, telephone poles. They're smaller antennas that sit on top of existing structures. So there is discussion right now at the committee about addressing small cell antennas outside of the town's right-of-way. In other words, if a cell carrier puts up a couple on telephone poles in the right-of-way along Route 38, that jurisdiction falls to the Board of Selectmen because it's within the town's right-of-way and they govern the town's right-of-way. If to jump into a neighborhood, an antenna ends up on a building, at that point it becomes a special permit issue with a specific location that the planning board will most likely have special permit jurisdiction over. The MFD 55 district and community development district were both removed from the bylaw because the committee believed that the multifamily district was able to pick up where these districts left off. These districts were set up specifically for age limiting zoning, which is beginning to run afoul of fair housing issues. So instead of mandating that you have to be 55 and older in a development, what ends up happening is if they came in for a multifamily development permit, the discussion could occur between the board and the applicant to restrict it, but it's not a mandate which sits in an existing district as we have today. The other overlay districts, Highway Corridor Overlay District, was a district that was developed for a mall off of South Street. There's about 80 acres there, and part of that, the only way that you could do that development was to have an interchange built off of I-93. And number one, no one's building malls today. In fact, a lot of malls are being converted into housing, community centers, office buildings. So the market for malls is significantly decreased, and the likelihood of an interchange being built there is extremely difficult. We went through this process back in 2005 to 2010, and because we are operating, Massachusetts is operating with a lane drop past Route 125 heading north, Federal Highway said the only way we would get an interchange is if a fourth lane was built from 125 in Wilmington all the way up to the New Hampshire border. So that all had to be part of that project, which was financially infeasible for anybody to do. Development impact studies or statements was something that was put in the bylaw back in 2002, and it was kind of mirroring the Mass Environmental Protection Act. And what we found is that a significant number of things that we asked for in this section of the zoning bylaw was already asked for elsewhere, whether it was in the special permit regulations or subdivision regulations. And so it made sense that, and this was never used over the course of the last 18 years, that the town had adequate protection in other areas to cover what we were looking for under that section. And then the last thing that was removed was section 9500, which is use special permits. The way that the current bylaw is structured, there are 3 different areas of the bylaw that have special permits. And again, like I said, it gets confusing when you try and figure out how are we regulating this project that's coming in. So we have use tables, and you get a use special permit off of that table. You find what district you're in, you look at what it is you want to do, and it tells you either no, you can't do it in that district, yes, you can by right, or by a special permit. So that's one way. The second way is we have this thing that's called site plan special permit, where if there's any expansion or enlargement of ground area dedicated to the purpose of 800 square feet or more, you had to get a site plan special permit. And then we had this section which talked about size of a project. All of that became very complicated and convoluted, and what were we really trying to achieve. And I know in working on the bylaw back in 2002, some of the things were carryovers from previous bylaws. So I think the draft bylaw that we have today is much cleaner in addressing these issues. We have, like I said earlier, site plan review, which is being introduced, which is going to cover size of projects. And then we have our use tables, which is going to cover what uses are allowed in the districts. So section 9500 is being removed from this. Again, a whole bunch of verbiage up here. That first bullet is really telling you that all of those overlay districts are being shifted from overlays to underlying districts. You'll find all of those on Route 38. The town right now, currently, and since the 60s probably, has one commercial district on Route 38 that runs from the Lowell line to the Wilmington line. And this is where I was talking about earlier about these character districts. I think everyone knows that as you travel down Route 38, there's different areas of Route 38 that just have a different character from another section of Route 38. Big box makes sense up by 495. It makes no sense in town center, but yet it's all one zoning district. So what we're trying to do is, and again, this goes back to the 2016, the 2003 master plan of saying you really need to address the characters of those areas instead of having this one long homogeneous commercial district. So that's why we're creating these new base districts. The other odd thing on Route 38 is that commercial district is 291 feet deep on each side of the center line of Route 38. So that splits through a number of properties and causes them to be split zoned, which adds its own elements of confusion and understanding. So what we've done with all of the rezoning along Route 38, and I think almost all of our zoning districts on the draft map, is to take every district right to the parcel line. This 291 feet deep is really, it was an old way of trying to zone things, and back in those days, they didn't have the parcel level detail that we have today. So our zoning maps currently and proposed can show you every parcel in town, which makes it easier for us to draw the district lines to the parcel boundary. Billboards, last town meeting or two, there was an amendment for 1,000 feet distance from a residential or multifamily district or use. And what the committee has decided is to change that to 500 feet of a residential use. So to kind of explain this, you can have an area that is zoned R40, but could have some type of industrial use on it. The way that the bylaw currently reads is that even if there's an industrial or commercial use there, the district, if it's R40, would mean you'd need to be 1,000 feet from this commercial district, or this commercial use. So we've really removed the word district and just said 500 feet of any residential use. And where the 500 feet comes, so there's a decrease in the distance, the 500 feet really is looking at it as the width of the right-of-way of the interstate itself. So from one side of 495's right-of-way to the other side of 495's right-of-way is 500 feet. Medical marijuana is something that we have on the books today. And we had some very restrictive components that kind of prevented any type of medical marijuana dispensary from locating here in Tewksbury. There was a 5,000 square foot cap on it, so this bylaw would remove that. The bylaw allows only one medical marijuana dispensary to be located in town, and that it had to be in a single-use building. So I think when we did this back in 2014, there was concern about it being located in a strip plaza or some other vacant building and the impact that it could have on those other types of uses. I think we now have 6 years of experience in watching what's happened in other communities and knowing that these medical marijuana dispensaries are more operating like a pharmacy. There's the rush for people to go to medical marijuana dispensaries is significantly less than people going to retail recreational marijuana dispensaries. So the committee and the planning board said, you know what, let's try to open this up a little bit to see if we can get some type of medical marijuana dispensary to locate here in town. Large-scale ground-mounted solar facilities, those are solar farms. We currently have 20 acres as a minimum requirement, and we had a consultant who was an energy efficiency consultant who looked at what other communities had in their bylaws and came back that the average size in other bylaws was 5 acres. So the committee decided to reduce it to 5 acres. And then, like I said before, that affordable housing requirement of 15% is going to be required in all multifamily developments going forward. Zoning map changes, I touched on A, I touched on B. Item C, the Great Swamp right now is zoned heavy industrial, and in looking at this, because so much of it is wetlands, and the likelihood of development is very, very low because there's not a lot of uplands there. The decision of the committee was to just reduce that to a park district. So there would be, if I remember correctly, in the park district, we have no commercial or residential components to it. So it kind of helps protect that space. Small lot zoning dimensional requirements are placed in the text of the bylaw. Study is to be commenced by the planning board and staff upon approval of the proposed bylaw. So this has sparked a lot of interest and concern of people about quarter-acre zoning or half-acre zoning, and we spent a lot of time talking about this. The committee, planning board, and really the thought behind it was we have a number of neighborhoods in town that were built out before 1 acre zoning. So you look at South Tewksbury is the best example. And because they're under a acre zoning requirement, everybody down there is non-conforming. You can't conform unless you buy 3 or 4 of your neighbors' properties, and then you have an acre lot that would be compliance with zoning. So we started talking about this, and there was a lot of back and forth, and what we realized was that it was something that was important that needed to be addressed. We looked at other surrounding communities and what their zoning was as far as setbacks were concerned and frontage requirements for less than 1 acre zoning. So we saw how Wilmington and Andover and Reading and a number of other communities treat less than 1 acre zone districts. And we came up with what we believed to be reasonable 1/4 acre, 1/2 acre zoning requirements. And we decided to put it in the bylaw to demonstrate that it's an important thing that needs to be addressed, and that we really didn't want people in the future to say, well, why wasn't this picked up during the zoning bylaw rewrite? Again, I told you this has taken 3.5 years to get to where we are today to do all of this cleanup. But when we started talking through how this was going to be addressed, we said, you know what, in order to do that leg of this, it needs to be done right. And we want to address potential concerns from residents. We want to allow for neighborhood input where these zones may be designated in town, and we wanted to avoid a blunt and imprecise implementation of these types of zoning districts. So the next step in the process upon approval of this zoning bylaw will be for the planning board and staff to look at neighborhoods in town to ensure that we have a precise and sensible siting of these districts. And the intent really is to try and complete that by the next town meeting. That's going to be a heavy lift, but it was something that the planning board felt very strongly in addressing. So the committee agreed with that, and that's how we plan on going forward. So basically, this draft bylaw is going to say, in an R10 district or in an R20 district, these are your setback requirements, these are your frontage requirements, these are your open space requirements. They will be in the bylaw, but they will not be implemented anywhere in town until the study is done neighborhood by neighborhood and looking at a lot of analytics that we have available to us at the staff level. And I'm going to show that once we're done with the presentation. I'll show you just a little bit of how we started looking at this, and it's by no means the end. It was really the beginning, and we said, this is important, but we want to do it right, and we want to get out into the neighborhoods and talk to people. So let's work on the zoning bylaw, get the zoning bylaw cleaned up, approved, and then we will address the small lots. So, moving forward, 1, 2 have been done, 3 is this evening. Number 4 is submitting the warrant article, which is by next Friday. The planning board, it's mandatory that they hold public hearings on all zoning articles. So that will occur in April. They have 2 meetings in April, and we're assuming we would do the first meeting in April to allow for a continuation of the discussion into their second meeting in April. And then I have here May 4th as the annual town meeting, but that date may be incorrect. It may actually be May 6th Is it 4th?
So May 4th is the meeting, and then May 6th is the
Right.
second one if we go over.
Yeah, so the way that the annual town meeting works is that May 4th is Monday night, and that's the beginning of the annual town meeting. We take up all budget items, and we take up all general bylaw items. By our town bylaw, it dictates that zoning is done on the second night of the annual town meeting. So that happens to be Wednesday, May 6th. That's how it
Yes.
works. Now I
Yeah.
got it.
Mhm.
So here's, for more information, we have everything up on the town's website for the zoning bylaw committee. Strongly recommend that people look, if you haven't already, look to the e-alerts, which is on the town's front page of the website. You sign up on that, you can check off everything that's of interest to you. So when anything goes on the website that's related to what's of interest to you, you'll get an email telling you to go to the website and look. I think you get a link for that. Questions or comments can be sent to this special email address, which is zoning@tewksbury-ma.gov. There's my contact information at the bottom. And
You can also come by the community development office.
yes, you
We're
can
open.
stop by Community Development Office here at Town Hall, which is in the lower level, co-located with the Health Board, the Health Department and the Building Department. So that's the presentation. And what I want to do is just kind of give you an idea on, because I think that it's of interest to people on the small lot zoning. This was done, this shows you how long we've been kind of talking about it and looking at it. So we did this back in 2018. I think we had 12 locations that we were looking at, but we kind of captured a section of South Tewksbury and said, let's give a closer look as to what's there on the ground. So everything in red there is undeveloped parcels. Everything that's developed is in yellow. So that captured 12,098 parcels. Only 28 were in excess of an acre out of that number of parcels. And so this shows you the breakdown of where people fall, if things were a half acre or if things were a quarter acre. And then you could see that more than half of those parcels in South Tewksbury are less than a quarter acre. So that creates its own dilemma, which we really haven't spent a lot of time discussing yet. So there's always a concern about, well, how many new parcels are being, how many parcels that could be developed are being created out of a zoning change. So here we saw that there were 209 undeveloped parcels, with, again, more than half of them being less than a quarter acre. So if you were to change the zoning to R10 or R20, you could possibly see 75 new lots. But that being said, I'm not sure if this has the wetlands impact, because South Tewksbury is a very wet place. So that's a whole nother level of analysis that we need to go through and take a look at. Then we looked at Salem Road area, and you can see that there's, again, very few undeveloped parcels in that area. So in that neighborhood that I had just had up, you had 152 of them fall between a quarter acre and a half acre. So the question is, does it make sense for that type of neighborhood to be rezoned to an R10, where you would take more than half of the lots that are there and make them conforming? Undeveloped parcels, again, you may pick up 7 new parcels, but that's not taking into account the wetlands or environmental constraints. So we went through this in I'm just going to show you Shawsheen Street we looked at. Foster and Whipple we took a look at. Chandler Street we took a look at. Hinckley and Tanglewood. Bridge Street, you can see there's a lot of small lots there. South Street. East Street. Hood Road. The Lincoln and Jefferson Road area. And then we just took a look at Rogers Street too. So we would be looking at, this table here, and this kind of shows you across all of those areas. So this is just part of the level of analysis that needs to be done to implement an R10 and an R20. I showed you some large areas. There's nothing to say that that wouldn't shrink down to something smaller than that, or a split between an R10 and an R20. We just don't know how that's all going to shake out without actually doing a little bit more analysis and then talking with the neighbors themselves. So there is no change to your individual lot today or tomorrow after the zoning passes. All of that would be done after this, precise look at how it would impact neighborhoods is done. And it would be on a very short timeline because, again, the planning board would like to see this done by the October town meeting. So that's getting in, crunching the numbers, going out in the neighborhoods, talking, a little bit of back and forth, tweaking, and then coming to town meeting with map changes in October.
And the small lot zoning isn't on the proposed map.
Right.
I haven't
So we
seen
don't
to effect yet.
we don't show the small lot zoning on the map because that's not part of what we're proposing for the annual town meeting. No map changes to R10 or R20. And one last thing I want to show you before we take questions. It'll be kind of hard to see because Tewksbury's map is kind of covers a lot of the town with a lot of different colors. So again, along Route 38, the current bylaw has this all one color, all along Route 38. Here you can see where it actually starts up by 495. It would be general business.
Just yellow.
Wherever the yellow is. When we hit the blue here around Old Boston Road, we change to, it's a village residential district. We get to town center, we go to purple. And down here, this light blue is a mixed use business. And then when we get into south of Shawsheen Street, we have South Village District here. So again, this goes back to the master plans where they said, South Tewksbury's character is very different than 495 character, and then in between there's differences along Route 38. So the zoning map reflects that. Also, this big green area up in here is the Great Swamp area, which is being proposed to shift to a park district. So that's what I wanted to show you as far as the map was concerned. So we did small lots, map, and now if anyone has questions, please ask. Actually, if you could use the microphone,
Pass it around.
yeah, if we just pass it around to whoever has questions, because we are live on cable and this will be rebroadcast, so just so that it picks up people's voices.
And those aren't the map, there was other changes too, so it's,
This one?
yeah, like the ones you mentioned.
Oh, yeah, there were additional changes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there's, additional changes. We just kind of did a high overview of that, but you would want to compare the current zoning map to this proposed one to really see the differences. And you may need to zoom in on your screen if it's a PDF, but you can come to our community development department and look at it as well. So.
Once it's in your hand, then you can pass it.
So the zoning changes that may happen with the residential lots, is that being addressed by the planning board? Or is it the same committee that worked on this other project?
As of right now, it looks like it's going to be the planning board because the small lot residential was never part of the scope of the zoning bylaw committee itself. They're going to be meeting next week, and I may ask them that question, but I think the planning board really wants to take the lead on this. And again, staff's, regardless of who's doing it, staff will be supporting either the committee or the planning board. Only because we have all of the information available to us.
Do you have a question?
As far as the small lot zoning is, we're still waiting for analysis on that to finish?
Yeah, so there needs to be a greater analysis on this. Like I said, the charge for the zoning rewrite was done back in 2016, and the committee started that rewrite in earnest in 2016. Small lots started to become a conversation in 2018, and so the committee started looking at it, took it to a certain point, and then jumped back to the text of the zoning bylaw and said, along with the planning board's agreement that, you need the additional neighborhood input. You need to be more precise in this before it can come to town meeting. So like I said, there's a recognition of how important it is by putting it in the text of the bylaw to say, when this comes, this is what it's going to look like. And R10 is going to have this type of setback. It's going to have this type of frontage. And it'll also be helpful in talking with the neighborhoods because when approved, we'll be able to go out and say, this is what we're talking about. It's not something that's left up in the air. It's something that has been approved, and we're talking to you, and you can opt into this and be part of this, and here's the reasons why. And we can also have the discussion about the analysis and what we show numbers-wise.
Thank you.
When you talk about small lots, quarter acre, does that only pertain to like new subdivisions, or could that help out say a resident that has like an acre and a half lot with
Yeah.
a good amount of frontage to subdivide?
The acre and a half, I'm not, probably won't help unless it shows up in that district. So in other words, if you have an acre and a half and you show up in an R20, if you're in a half acre zoning, then you could potentially have 3 buildable lots there. But like I said, that would be for those areas which we already know are very dense because of the historical build-out of the neighborhoods. But that's not to say that there aren't an acre and a half lot someplace buried there in one of those neighborhoods. And then applying to new subdivisions, that's a question that I don't have an answer to. I think as we kind of work through this in the springtime and through the summer, we'll probably have a better idea of how that will be handled. And then you'll see it in the fall.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are the R40 districts, if there's undeveloped land there and it's but it's zoned R40, are those lots that are undeveloped, are they going to be able to be subdivided into half-acre lots in the future?
So let me start by saying, I don't want to be misleading, so I want to start by saying that today we have open space residential design subdivisions. So we do today allow for subdivisions to be built out with 10,000 square foot lots. Half of that in an R40 district. Half of that parcel, though, needs to remain open space. So that can be done today. Your question is, can it occur in an R40 that they would be allowed to do something less than that? And the answer is only with an open space residential design development, which we have today, or a zoning change to make that an R10 or an R20. There would be nothing that would allow for an half-acre or quarter-acre subdivision to be proposed in an R40 district unless it was done under open space residential design.
All right, thank you.
Yep. So the microphone has returned to the cradle. Okay, well, I think I will just go, no, I lost that last page. Anyways, all of that contact information, we really would, like to hear from people. If you have questions or comments or concerns, whether you email it to that zoning@Tewksbury address, call my number, stop by the office as Anna had suggested. We really believe that if you're not happy with the way things are today, that this is a better product going forward and will address a number of concerns that have come up over the last 5-10 years. So I want to provide the best answers possible to any questions that people may have. So please feel free to reach out to us anytime. And thank you for coming out this evening.